Hey folks, good morning. Thanks for watching this March 18th weather update. I'm Matt Reardon. When I think about the severe weather events of this past weekend, we're still kind of filtering through some of the reports here. The Storm Prediction Center releasing this map yesterday of all the different reports we had across a number of different geographies. This was a multi-day severe weather event. I want to break this down a little bit as it relates to what it might reflect for some of the drought that we're seeing in the southern plains, at least historically, connecting it to the severe weather reports that we're seeing here. That's going to transition into talking about the forecast. We have another relatively deep low pressure system coming off the Colorado Rockies here over the next 48 hours, bringing blizzard, potentially some severe threat as well. We'll talk about the precipitation associated with that. A few more systems behind it, but we're seeing kind of a calming down of this progressive pattern, where we've just been seeing this parade of low pressure systems through the central part of the country. That might be breaking down a bit. And I'll try to relate that back to the severe weather conversation we're having here and how we might put together the forecast going into April, getting a sense for where we might see this dryness expand, if that's a risk, and where we might see severe weather as well. Now, when I think about the map that we're looking at to start here, the statistics are on the left. I mentioned the total reports here, over 1,000, which is impressive for any time of the year, let alone in the middle of March. It is the beginning of our severe weather season, but this was an impressive event, kind of putting it into context historically. We try to take you kind of an overhead shot of satellite. This released from the Sierra Institute out of Colorado State. Amazing satellite imagery of the low pressure system that just spun up off screen. And then that second outbreak of severe weather that occurred in the southeast, kind of starting up in that morning loop of the GIF here. Ultimately, this moved off east into portions of Pennsylvania and New York, but just an incredible event. If you look closely, we're at Saturday morning here. You can actually see the dust that started here, when I'll restart the loop, ending up over portions of Illinois and the Midwest. It actually pushed all the way up into portions of southern Canada, just kind of indicative of how strong this system was. Now, I mentioned that we reached over 1,000 severe reports. If I take you back to March of 2024, looking at the whole month across the country of March, we didn't reach over 1,000 reports in all of 2024. So impressive what we just saw this past weekend. Now, I was looking back at some of these varying statistics of these severe weather reports over recent years, and I found kind of an interesting pattern here that I think relates to some of the drought concern that we have here in 2025. And I want to take you through that for a second. One, if we look at March of 2024 and kind of the coverage here, it's not widespread, kind of focused on portions of the Midwest, the northern plains, the southeast. Don't see a lot of activity here. But again, March is the beginning of the severe weather season. As we shifted into April, saw quite a few tornado reports over in the western Corn Belt. It was very busy in portions of western Iowa, eastern Nebraska with a tornado outbreak there near the end of the month. We see activity all the way through Texas, even along the Ohio River Valley as well. Again, April, kind of the severe weather season ramping up a bit. As we transition to May, unfortunately in terms of severe weather, but fortunately for precipitation coverage, widespread, uniform severe weather across much of the country. If you can kind of find an area that was maybe missing out, well, portions of the eastern Dakotas or Minnesota. And the reason for that is so many of these storms were just kind of training along the Nebraska, Iowa to portions of Wisconsin line here. We dealt with flooding issues because of this. But other than that, widespread severe weather coverage. Severe storms bring precipitation. It's a double-edged sword, and we didn't see huge areas of drought developing in 2024. If I take this into June, you can kind of predictably see the location of our summer high-pressure system here across the southeast. Now, this is a predictable severe weather pattern. As we go from May to June, those severe weather reports shift to the north. That doesn't necessarily mean this area here underneath the high was totally dry. Throughout the year, we see a lot of these pop-up thunderstorms, which produce these kind of smattering of weak wind reports across the southeast. So this looks pretty typical and seasonal of that May to June transition without huge drought concerns across the U.S. When we think about the drought in 2024, it was really isolated to localized areas here in the eastern Corn Belt or mid-Atlantic, and we had some dryness to contend with in portions of the southern plains, but certainly nothing hugely widespread across the central part of the country. Well, how does that compare to a year like 2011? If I take you back to March of 2011, kind of as the severe weather season was getting started, shifted more toward the east, I would argue significantly so, well east of the Mississippi River, save for a few tornado reports near Iowa. And a lot of green on this map. Green is hail in these severe reports. And what we know about hail growth, kind of counterintuitively, is the drier air in the mid-levels can actually help fuel hail growth. And so curiously, it seems that these storms east of the Mississippi River had a lot of dry air to work with. And when we think about the drought of 2011 and where that originated, very much in the southern plains. When we talk about these systems coming from west to east across that drought here, picking up some of that high elevation dry air, likely fueling those early hail reports that we saw in March of 2011. Now, I'm going to take you through 2011 quickly. As we go to April, we had the historic outbreak of April 27th. But again, this map shifted well to the east. A lot of the red that you're seeing was just from that severe outbreak on April 27th, arguably top one or top two tornado outbreak in United States history. There's a lot of green on this map. Kind of underneath all that red, all those tornado reports, you can see just how many hail reports there were. Again, shifted more toward the east. Now, similar to this year, we were looking in May and June for the severe weather activity to shift back west to bring some precipitation back to the high plains. We saw some of that briefly in May with some of these tornado reports here in portions of central and northern Texas, but very isolated coverage there across a relatively small area in terms of the widespread drought that we just saw from the drought monitor. A lot of this activity still off to the east in May. Comparing this to what we saw in 2024, which was more widespread uniform coverage, we're not seeing that here. By June, a lot of the activity kind of focused in the midsection of the country, leaving portions of the upper Midwest and the southern plains dry here. By July, that high pressure system dominating the middle Mississippi River Valley. And then ultimately by August, some northwest flow here over portions of the central plains here, but a lack of reports over the central part of the country. And that kind of follows what we saw with the drought development in August by 2011, where it's kind of anchored in the southern plains, but that dryness started extending out over toward the Corn Belt. 2011 was a banner year for severe weather reports. A lot of those came through just in that April outbreak that I just talked about. Whenever we show these kind of annual summaries of severe reports, this one being tornadoes here for 2025, which is this red accruing line at the bottom, the prior years are on the screen and these kind of dotted lines in the background. And 2011 always stands out because starting in April, it just took off in a huge way. We saw a number of severe weather reports, again, likely connected to that southern plains drought that we saw. If I take you to March of 2012 and kind of look at how those reports materialized, again, starting early in the year, a lot of that severe weather activity was shifted to the east. We saw a tornado outbreak in early March across the Ohio River Valley, the Henryville tornado, perhaps the most notable from that. But again, a lot of green on this map too in 2012. By April, the activity did shift back quite a bit west. This is kind of what we're rooting for this year in some ways, not the tornado and hail reports, but the precipitation and the thunderstorm activity shifting back west over portions of the southern and high plains to return precipitation there. By May, that activity stayed there. And you can actually see the high pressure system, that summer high, developing too early in May here across portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley. And that flow just going around it, fueling the thunderstorms on the periphery of that high pressure system. Across the middle part of the country by June, that high pressure was established. You had severe weather reports east of that high pressure system. You had severe weather reports again on the periphery, well over to the high plains, portions of Minnesota, Colorado, South Dakota. But the middle part of the country, very few reports here in June. Not good coverage like we saw in 2024. By July, a lot of the activity again east of the central Corn Belt, and then a few reports in August, and we don't need to rehash what happened in 2012. Widespread drought in the middle part of the country, those storms firing along the periphery of that. So when I think about 2025, go to March of this year, it's not as shifted further to the east. We don't see that huge kind of that green hail report signature. We are kind of waiting on April and May to see if these reports are going to shift back west a bit over here to the plains, the central plains, the southern plains, and the high plains as well. If we get into April and May and we see the Weather Channel out in Amarillo or portions of Oklahoma City or over in portions of Hays, Kansas, well, we know the precipitation's returning back to here. If we're seeing activity all over like we saw in 2024, that drought concern is going to lessen. But if April shifts east and we see a lot more hail reports across the south or maybe some areas where we typically don't see them, well, that's indicative of drought, I would think, building in portions of the southern plains and potentially trying to expand. So we'll keep an eye on the story as it kind of unfolds in April and May. That is the peak of our severe weather season, and I think it'll harken to any kind of drought conversation that we have to fend off in 2025. Now, this year and this week, it's going to be dependent on the location of the high pressure system and then the next low pressure system coming in. So I want to get into that conversation here. If we look at the surface level winds, just valid as this morning here on Tuesday morning, you can see the southerly flow coming out of the Gulf of Mexico out ahead of our next system that's going to come through. This is a common kind of setup for thunderstorms in the middle part of the country. So we're going to talk about the potential for that here over the next few slides. Now, one thing that the last system did as it relates to the map we're looking at here, the surface level winds are still on here on those streamlines. But what I have plotted here is CAPE, which is what we talk about in terms of fuel or instability for thunderstorms. And what you're not seeing on this map is a lot of that CAPE that I just attempted to plot. You'd have to go well south near the equator, this kind of tropical areas, to see some of that CAPE. And that's because the last system that came through brought this cold front all the way through the Gulf of Mexico. And you can see that northerly push of wind behind it, pushing that CAPE well off to the southern portions of the Caribbean Sea. So this next system is going to try to bring up some instability into the central part of the country, but it's going to struggle. And there's a question as to whether we're going to get enough instability in the middle part of the country, perhaps portions of the central or eastern Corn Belt, for severe weather this week. The Storm Prediction Center has their latest forecast out. We'll talk about that in just a few slides here. If we shift from the surface level conversation up to the upper level winds, can see the trough coming on shore here. This just came on shore yesterday in portions of California. And this is the influence of the next system, that low pressure system that's going to spin up. Again, a potent one over portions of Kansas. This storm will look different than the one that we just dealt with for two reasons. One, we just talked about. It'll be more moisture starved, less instability for thunderstorms, likely less precipitation overall. And then the second piece of that, while it will be potent, likely sub 990 millibars, likely not dropping down to the 972, 973 that we saw last week. So we would think, at least comparatively, the impacts broad scale would be less, and then without that same severe weather concern, those concerns lessened as well. That's not to say this storm is not significant. We have red flag warnings posted for a number of areas this morning, high wind watches, advisories, and warnings going out as well, so that drought and wildfire risk continues. And we'll have to talk about the detailed severe weather conversation in just a moment. Look at high-level satellite imagery. This is water vapor here this morning, kind of before the sunrise reaches the rest of the continent. And we can see the reflection of that trough now moving over Nevada with the high clouds streaming up over the northern plains. But if you look to the south of that, aside from the subtropical jet bringing some serious cloud debris over portions of the southern plains and the southern U.S., not a ton of moisture here. In fact, underneath these high clouds here, you can see this dry air in yellow. It's really kind of baked into this area south of this low pressure system as it's developing. If we just look at the last 24 hours of precipitation reports, as this low pressure system and trough came on shore, saw quite a bit of activity in California. Actually had a severe thunderstorm watch and warning here, had a tornado warning in portions of east of Modesto in the Central Valley of California. They can get weak tornadoes in the Central Valley of California. It happens occasionally every year, and we did have a report of a funnel potentially touching down east of Modesto yesterday. Saw some pictures on social media reports. Haven't seen any kind of storm damage from this, but nonetheless pretty neat to see all the way over in California, especially when it doesn't cause any damage or injuries. Up to the east of this picture, this radar screen grab here is the Sierra Nevada, and the snow was falling there as it continues to pile up. Late in the season, they're having one of these what they call miracle marches in California, where they get more precipitation and snowfall late in the winter before it shuts off predictably in summer. And if we just look at their snowpack as it relates to their water year to date, it's been climbing back toward average. We started very below average through the middle part of winter, very dry in portions of California in the first half of winter, i.e. their water year. Now, if we look at the Sierra Nevada snowpack, we're a lot closer to average in the northern Sierra and up near the Klamath Mountains, well above average as you go further toward the south, climbing back to about 90% of average. If I go to just a few weeks ago, and we're to plot the same map, you'd see anywhere from 70 to 75% on average. Colors more yellow or red on this color bar here. I'm going to go back a few slides here and look at this upper level jet stream pattern here. I just talked about the trough here moving into the central U.S., the low pressure system likely to develop as a result of that. If we look behind that, see another system coming behind that, and then another system well out into the northwest Pacific could be coming in after this one. This pattern's moving. We're going to see more of these systems come through, but it's a little bit different than what we saw earlier in the month, and we'll talk about that in just a second. As I jump forward here, we're going to look at the forecast here from the ECMWF. This is looking at their upper level height map. We can kind of connect what we just saw in that jet stream pattern to this trough here over the kind of Four Corners area. There's that one behind it that we just looked at. I'm going to play this forward and through Tuesday evening. That trough now moving across the central U.S., the low pressure system developing tonight into Wednesday morning, that low pressure system and that trough moving across the Corn Belt Wednesday evening, then into Thursday, before finally moving off Friday, early Friday morning. That system coming in behind it, comparably much weaker. So we'll have to talk about this on Friday, but really quite a bit weaker than the last two systems, kind of including that one in here now, than what we've dealt with. There'll be another one behind that, sneaking through portions of the northern plains and the upper Midwest. That's Sunday afternoon. But again, that one weaker as well. So while we seem to have loaded up these next few systems, they're not going to be as strong as some of the ones that we've seen in March or even late February here. So wanted to get that kind of conversation started before we got too deep into the forecast, because I know if you look back in the Pacific, right, some of these slides, it looks very active, but I think this conversation's changing, and we'll get into that at the end of this video. Catch us up here this morning, to all the hazards that the National Weather Service is watching. A lot of pretty colors in the middle part of the country. That's indicative of, unfortunately, some weather coming our way. So all the kind of indigo, I shouldn't say indigo, but the pink colors that you can see here across portions of the plain, the southern plains over to Missouri, are red flag warnings. A common sight that we've seen in March over this area, indicative of the dry weather that we're seeing expand there. Those are the red flag warnings that had been posted. The kind of beige, yellowy, mustard colors that you can see there are various high wind watches, advisories, and warnings going out as this low pressure system spins up quickly over the next 24 hours, looking at another plains wind event. And frankly, potentially, we could see another dust storm as the storm system spins up and works its way through the Corn Belt yet again. And that orange color there, those are blizzard warnings. To the northeast of that, over portions of Wisconsin, winter storm watches have been posted. So maybe unlike the last system, seeing a more centralized snow and blizzard threat over portions of Nebraska and western Iowa. We'll talk about those numbers in just a second here. Over the west, as the system kind of comes through, winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings for portions of Wyoming and Montana as well. Looking at the precipitation forecast, this is from the ECMWF. I want to watch this low spin up here. I'll take this forecast to Tuesday at lunchtime. This is 1 p.m. Central. And quickly after that, by dinner time, 7 p.m. Tuesday, this evening, that low pressure system starting to deepen in western Kansas. I'm going to take this overnight to 1 a.m. Again, deepening, continuing over portions of central Kansas now, snow developing on the backside of this. But curiously, if you look at this map, what's missing from it, and we talked about the reason for this, is any kind of warm sector or southern mode of precipitation as the storm system spins up overnight tonight. That starts to change early Wednesday as we get some showers across portions of Iowa, snow on the backside of this over Kansas and Nebraska. This is when those blizzard conditions are really going to start picking up. Blizzard warnings posted now for Nebraska and western Iowa. Finally seeing some semblance of precipitation along the cold front here, stretching down the middle and southern Mississippi River Valley. This is all the way lunchtime now Wednesday. And there's kind of question to see how much thunderstorm development we're going to see along this front, now extending through portions of Indiana, again through Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky here. This is Wednesday afternoon and evening. There's a question of how much thunderstorm coverage we're going to see here, because if it does develop and we do get a little bit more moisture kind of at the last second surging up from the Gulf of Mexico, there could be a severe weather component to this. Again, this is a deep, strong low, a little bit weaker than the one that we saw on Friday and Saturday last week, but nonetheless, if it had enough moisture, we'd be talking about a significant severe weather threat through portions of the central Corn Belt and likely through the Mid-South as well. But the questions remain just because of the lack of instability for those thunderstorms. I want to show you the maximum wind gusts, this forecast from the GFS here this morning. As I take this through, we mentioned all those beige colors here, the wind watches, wind advisories. That threat will continue with this system like we saw from the last one. So I've made this forecast valid for this afternoon. This is 1 p.m. Tuesday, Central Time here. This would be noon Mountain Time. Again, lunchtime today, those winds picking up across New Mexico, southern Colorado. Take this forecast into this evening. You can see those spreading across the West Texas and the panhandle here of Oklahoma. This is early Wednesday morning, western Kansas. See those winds picking up here. Then as this low pressure system deepens tonight over portions of eastern Kansas as well. This wind threat is significant. It's something to watch. This will transition more Wednesday morning. early Wednesday to that blizzard concern as that snow starts flying here in portions of Nebraska and western Iowa. Out ahead of the system, that southerly flow, right, trying to bring that Gulf moisture back. Nonetheless, there will be those southerly winds, and with a lack of precipitation, at least for much the first half of Wednesday, I would expect that wildfire and red flag concern to shift over portions of the central Corn Belt as well. So a wide area of wind and fire concern over the next 2 days here. We just saw, last week, the dust that was blowing out from Texas into Oklahoma, saw wildfires explode across portions of central Oklahoma. That risk continues here today. Now, I'm not saying it's going to reach the same level. The storm is not as deep. But again, this is a real risk and something we have to watch for. I like this image. This is, again, from Sierra out of Colorado State. The weather does not know about political or geographic boundaries here. It's just going to do what it's going to do. And when you get these satellite shots without any kind of state or country lines or Gulf Coast lines, it really gives you a sense for just the scale of the atmosphere. And the fact that, we live and work and try to make a living, raise families underneath all of this. You can see the dust storm here over portions of what's likely Oklahoma, Texas, portions of New Mexico, the severe weather that was firing across Missouri. Illinois is probably right in here. But again, it's hard to see. This is just the weather as it is. It's our job to kind of put numbers, context, state lines, everything on it. But it's going to continue to do what it's going to do, and that's going to continue this week as well. It's just kind of a high-level reminder that Mother Nature is in charge. If we jump over, this is the precipitable water forecast for Wednesday afternoon. I made this valid as of lunchtime here. I'm going to actually take you back to this morning, Tuesday morning. You can see just how dry we are across portions of the central U.S. behind that front that cleared out from the Gulf of Mexico. But as I take this forecast forward and through Tuesday afternoon and then Wednesday, you're going to see that moisture try to return out ahead of the system now Wednesday morning into Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening. Some of these forecasts here, the ECMWF, actually getting a decent amount of moisture back at the last second. And as a result of that, it does bring seemingly some thunderstorms through this area. The 3-kilometer NAM showing kind of a similar look. If I take this out to Wednesday evening, this is at 8 p.m. now. I'm not zooming in too much here, but you can see thunderstorm development all the way from Chicago through Indianapolis, down through Kentucky, Tennessee, maybe even reaching through portions of Mississippi. So while this area is moisture starved now, some of these models are bringing some impressive return of that instability back into the area, and we might have to watch for the severe weather threat if this continues to trend this way. Now, I can tell you, I'm going to zoom in here on the 3-kilometer NAM forecast. I'm going to take this forecast back a bit so we can watch this whole low pressure system develop on the simulated radar here. The 3-kilometer NAM tends to be aggressive on developing storms. That just tends to be a bias it has. That can be helpful in some ways on days where a lot of the models are overdeveloping storms. If the NAM, which is known for it, is not, that could be a clue that maybe the storms aren't going to be as aggressive as you think. But on these days where there's questionable storm coverage and the NAM is really blowing up the storms, we can't always take it as gospel. But nonetheless, by about 4 or 5 p.m. Friday, we can see storms developing across portions of central Illinois, extending down into Kentucky and Tennessee as that pushes across Indiana, kind of in the dinner and then in the overnight hours toward the eastern Corn Belt here. Again, there's going to be quite a bit of shear here. Not a ton of instability, but this will likely, if these storms develop, materialize some kind of wind and weak hail threat in this area. Can't rule out some tornadoes as well, perhaps on the weaker side. But the details just not quite clear yet until we see how much instability we can work into the area. When all said and done, the Storm Prediction Center has a forecast out now for a slight risk. Again, Chicago stretching through the Illinois-Indiana line down through portions of the middle Mississippi River Valley for Wednesday afternoon and evening. Again, not the strongest classification right now. We'll have to see how this develops. Again, I think the ceiling of this event is limited by this lack of moisture. Shifting the temperature conversation, as you'd imagine, Tuesday, with that southerly flow that I just showed you coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, much warmer temperatures from many areas east of the Continental Divide here across the Central Plains over toward the Corn Belt. Cooler on the backside of the system out west. We're going to see that pattern continue as we go into the day Wednesday. Warmer east out ahead of the system, but with that cold front coming through Wednesday, pushing from west to east, we'll see those temperatures come down throughout the day. Colder winds and temperatures on the backside of this on Thursday, before moderating on Friday and Saturday out ahead of those weaker systems that we'll see come through in the forecast in just a second here. Now, I showed you the simulated forecast from the 3-kilometer NAM for the radar. I'm going to take this forward with precipitation type here for that same model, the 3-kilometer NAM. You can see Wednesday morning those blizzard conditions developing across portions of eastern Nebraska, parts of Kansas, western Iowa. They'll perhaps be at their strongest. That continues through the day Wednesday, end of the afternoon. We talked about the thunderstorm threat for portions of the Corn Belt, but over portions of Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula, and portions of northwest Missouri, seeing snow on the backside of the system as it comes through. Some of these same areas that are likely going to see potential thunderstorm concern on Wednesday afternoon, looking at flying flurries, breezy northwest winds as we go into Thursday morning. I don't think getting some snow in here is a bad thing. We've talked this year about the Southern Plains dryness expanding, but another concern I have is what I've been calling kind of the snow drought of the upper Midwest and the Northern Plains this year. Snow, as it melts in springtime, it gets water into the soil a little bit slower. There's less runoff as a result of that. So when you have areas picking up some of these snow deficits that we've seen this year, anywhere from 20 to 25 inches below average, it's concerning from a drought perspective, especially when we have drought further to the south that might try to meet up with that later in the year as we get warmer and warmer into April and May. So getting some snow here on the backside of the system, I don't think it's a bad thing. We just hope it doesn't have too many inclement weather effects for the folks traveling there. If we got some of the forecasted snow totals, again, a narrow band, kind of like we saw last week with this system stretching anywhere from Kansas through Nebraska, portions of Iowa, potentially reaching over a foot in some isolated areas here. If you look at this color bar, 3-kilometer NAM, again, a little bit over aggressive on these snow totals. I don't think we're going to reach up near 2 feet of snow, but certainly anywhere from 8 to 10 inches is on the table here. If we look at the GFS forecast over a similar swath here, again, stretching from portions of northern Kansas through central and eastern Arkansas over toward the Sioux Falls area, and then southern Minnesota. The GFS a little bit further toward the northwest than some of these other forecasts here. If I show you the ECMWF, you can see that banding comparing to the other models a little bit shifted further to the southeast, or portions of north central Iowa. If we just look at the WPC's, their snowfall probability map, this is the chances for over 8 inches through the middle part of the week. Really kind of the color I'm looking at here is blue. That's where we exceed 50% in chances here, and you can see that swath stretching from portions of western Iowa, portions of far eastern Nebraska, up through portions of Wisconsin, and then the UP as well. Want to give kind of a national level picture of this precipitation conversation, also to touch on those next systems that are going to come through. So I'll make this forecast valid here as of Tuesday morning. Today, expecting that low pressure system to continue to deepen for portions of Kansas. We talked about that snow potential picking up overnight tonight, but a lack of rainfall on the southern edge of this. There's those blizzard conditions developing by Wednesday lunchtime tomorrow. And through Wednesday evening, talked about the severe weather threat as that shifts east. And then by Thursday morning, the system moving off over toward the mid-Atlantic, the far eastern Corn Belt through the southeast. Comparatively less severe weather threat as the system moves east. Again, that moisture plume that's coming up is just not enough to get into the eastern part of the country. So it's going to be shunted by the Appalachian Mountains here and not looking at a significant severe weather threat as we go through the day on Thursday. The system then kind of wrapping up over portions of Maine before exiting Friday. We talked about that system potentially coming through on Friday, but only seeing a slight reflection in this. Again, even more moisture starved across the central U.S. on the backside of this most recent system likely to come through here on Wednesday. Behind it, even less moisture for these next systems to work with, and hardly even getting rain showers out of this one here. So take the forecast into Sunday. That's when we expect that next system to come through. Again, not a huge reflection in precipitation here. I will say this one will have a little bit better access to moisture. And as it comes through and develops some showers and thunderstorms through portions of the Mid-South, even the southern Mississippi River Valley, there is likely more of a severe weather threat attached to this next system Sunday p.m. Quite a ways away. Don't have a lot of details on that yet, but this is an area I think we'll have to keep an eye on for some potential severe weather just because we're finally returning some moisture into here after a few days of not having it. So take the forecast beyond that. We're all the way into the next work week here. I don't want to get too deep into the details here, but the big news, I think, as it relates to what we've been seeing over the last few weeks is right now not seeing our kind of scheduled big storm system in the middle part of the country for the next work week. If I even take this ECMWF forecast out to the end of it, apart from what we just talked about on Sunday p.m., no huge low pressure system to talk about potentially in the next work week. And I think that pattern is slowing down a bit. And I'll show you what I mean by that. This is the ECMWF AIFS. I'm going to make this valid here as a Tuesday morning. we'll watch these systems come through. There's the one that we have to talk about this week on Wednesday. That weak one on Friday that barely even got precipitation out of it. A little bit more potent one on Sunday simply because it has better moisture to work with through parts of the Mid-South. But the pattern starts to stall a bit. We get this upper level ridge developing across the western U.S., and that has a little bit of staying power. We see this low pressure system likely to develop over the northwest near the end of the week. Now, as I take you through the forecast through the end of next week, we're well out into the forecast here. But this ridge is going to quickly translate to the right. After it does that, some of the long-range models want to put it right back here over the west and want to put a trough right back here over the eastern U.S. And what I'm seeing here, maybe a different way to show this is looking at the ECMWF ensemble, is this tendency for the height pattern to amplify a bit and slow down. So less of these kind of continuous systems to come through like we saw in March. As I take this out, more of this long wave pattern, cool east, warmer to the west. Again, this is next work week. We're going to see that ridge shift east as we go through the next work week. So warmer temperatures coming in relief likely near the end of next week. That would be next weekend. Cooler temperatures west. So take this forecast out, again, shifting that ridge back over to the west, likely blocking kind of a sequence of storm systems from coming through the country. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, their forecasted temperature outlook as we get out into next week, warmer west, cooler east. I think that continues for a bit. If we looked at their 8 to 14 day outlook, again, warmer west, cooler east. I talked about how the end of next work week, this warmth likely briefly shifting over toward the eastern U.S. before potentially shifting back west. When I think about kind of the temperatures in the middle part of next week, we're all the way out at March 26th now. This is the probability from the ECMWF ensemble of reaching below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. With that cooler weather out east, you can see where that freeze line could be setting up across portions of the central Corn Belt, extending over to the mid-Atlantic. With those successive systems coming in, weaker and weaker, not a ton of precipitation to be had. We saw that even with the system coming through here on Wednesday. And just looking at the ECMWF ensemble, their 14-day precipitation anomalies, again, overlapping with that area of drought concern across the southern plains, even potentially some of that dryness starting to expand out from there. That's our concern going into April right now. If we look at some of the other models here, the ECMWF AIFS, having a little bit more precipitation through portions of the central Corn Belt. But otherwise, this dryness here only getting more entrenched as we go through the end of March. This is a concern we're going to have to continue to watch for. Now, I mentioned this a few times this video, and I think at the beginning as well. We're looking at an overhead shot of the northern hemisphere right now. And the reason I'm showing this is, again, to identify that trough pattern and the ridge pattern as we go into April. I'm starting this video here. It's looking at a 5-day rolling average of our upper level height anomalies. And what we can see here in the Pacific is a lot of troughing across Alaska, troughing across Canada, the North Pacific, weak ridging below that, and the jet streams just flowing quickly between the two. That's why we're seeing system after system come into the U.S. They happen to be weaker this week, but as we saw that in March, we saw these large systems coming into the central part of the country with numerous impacts. As I take this 5-day rolling window, I'm going to take it out into the forecast here. We're now getting through the end of March. Now that 5-day rolling window is on April 1st. And we've lost a lot of that troughing across Canada. We've lost it in portions of the North Pacific. In fact, we've developed a upper level block here over portions of the Aleutians and west of Hawaii. We have a large trough here across the western U.S. and this weak ridging kind of entrenched here across the central U.S. with this weak troughing here. So what was a system or a pattern conducive for a sequence of low pressure systems to come through the middle part of the country seems to be transitioning more blocked up, a little bit more amplified, and less chances for precipitation to get into the middle part of the country. So that drought concern that we started the video with looks to potentially have some staying power in early April. That's not to say we won't have chances to break out of it getting through April, but continuing here, that concern continues, right? So waiting for severe weather reports, perhaps that's the mode of action that we'll use to break it up, likely waiting further out into April to see something like that. The extended weeklies that we've seen kind of come out over the last few days have kind of reinforced this forecast as we go through April here. This forecast March 20th through April 20th for precipitation anomalies. If I take this through the whole month of April, there is some hints of returning moisture and activity in terms of thunderstorms back into the southern plains as we get near the end of April. But at least through the beginning part, the wait continues with more dryness expected through the southern plains. Just going to wrap up here. Again, I'll return back to the all hazards map here from NOAA. Red flag warnings out for portions of the central and southern plains. A lot of wind advisories underneath that, and then beyond that, some high wind watches and warnings now being posted. Heed the blizzard warnings here. High winds, cold temperatures, and heavy snowfall quickly can be a travel hazard, certainly. And then winter storm watches extending up to the northeast of there. So a little bit less severe weather to talk about this week, but that wind, wildfire, and that dust threat still remains. So stay safe, and Eric will talk with you all tomorrow morning on Wednesday. Thanks for watching.